All right, this hearing of the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Strategic Forces will come to order. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here and taking the time to prepare for this hearing. We are going to have a problem with votes in a little while, crunching our time, and we have a big panel. So the ranking member and I have agreed that we're going to dispense with opening statements, both on our side and on your side, so we can go straight to questions and answers and try to get both the open side of this hearing as well as the classified part of this hearing done before they call us for votes, which we think will be around, what, 4? 3:30 or 4. Gosh, I have no control over that. So anyway, we will accept the opening statements for the record and go straight to questions. And I will recognize myself for the first set of questions, if that's without objection. All right. General Hyten, some have suggested that we should, well, first let me, for the record, acknowledge who all we have for witnesses here today. We have General John Hyten, Commander, Air Force Space Command, Mr. Doug Loverro, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy, Dyke Weatherington, Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Strategic and Intelligence Systems. I'd like to see your business card. That's a lot to put on there. Lieutenant General David Buck, Commander, Joint Functional Component Command for Space, and Mr. Robert Cardillo, Director, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, as well as Frank Calvelli, Director, National Reconnaissance Office. Deputy Director. It says Director here. I'm trying to give you a promotion. Betty wouldn't like that, would she? Thank you all for being here. All right, we'll go to questions again. General Hyten, some have suggested that we should phase out Atlas V and go to Delta IV and Falcon 9 mix prior to a new U.S. engine being built. In testimony at the SASC earlier this month, the Secretary of the Air Force stated that preliminary analysis showed it was going to cost $1.5 to $5 billion in additional costs, depending on assumptions of when to transition. Can you provide your perspective on going to Delta Falcon only capability before we have replaced the RD-180? If this cost had to be taken out of existing space accounts, what would be the impact on the Air Force space mission?
Thank you, Congressman. The impact on the existing Air Force space mission would be significant, because if you have to take billions of dollars out and try to do something else with it, what are you going to take out? Are we going to stop doing GPS? Are we going to stop doing missile warning? Are we going to stop doing satellite communications? Those are very, very difficult questions. So it'll actually come back to the Air Force, and we'll have to decide where to do that. The number $1.5 to $5 billion is a significant number. What it should really tell you is that in reality, we don't know how much that will cost us. The reason we don't know how much it'll cost us and the estimates are so huge is because, as the Secretary said, we have so many assumptions about what the future is going to look like. Are we going to have a Falcon 9 Heavy in the interim period between 19 and 22? What is the industry going to look like between 19 and 22? All those questions we really don't know the answer to. We know if we come off of Atlas and go to Delta, there's certain things we have to do. SBIRS and AEHF, two of our big satellites today, the Space-Based Infrared System, the Advanced Extremely High-Frequency Satellite System, only fly on Atlas today. So we'd have to figure out on how to move those to Delta. We have to do the engineering analysis and maybe reconfigure those satellites and reconfigure the interfaces to do that, which means we'll have to store AHF and SBIRS for a certain period of time. All that costs us money. That costs us money in the near years. Then Delta will be more expensive. There's no doubt Delta will be more expensive. The number is going to be in the billions. There's no doubt about that. But exactly where it comes out, I don't know. So planning for uncertainty is not a good place to be. So we would like to plan for certainty in the transition, which is why we're asking for additional RD-180s to allow us to compete. Goodness knows we want off the Russian engine as fast as any human being on the planet. We want off the Russian engine as fast as possible. But asking the American taxpayers to write a check for multiple billions of dollars in the future for an unknown is a very difficult thing to do. And for the Air Force, that'll be a very difficult budget issue to work.
And I would like, for the record, to ask you this question. We've had testimony on panels that you've sat on, as well as a host of other people at this table, as well as others, who have said that they believe with some degree of confidence that we can have a replacement engine and have it certified in the 2020 to 2022, 23 time frame. Is that something you still believe is accurate?
So 2 contracts we've just signed for the first stage engine. Both require the delivery of that engine by December of 2019. It'll then take 2 to 3 years to certify that into a rocket system to allow us to launch. So that means by 2022 to 2023, we should be ready to launch.
And you have confidence in that time frame?
I have more confidence today than I did last year. There's always risk in any development program that is looking at new technology. So there is risk in that. But I'm more confident this year with both the Aerojet Rocketdyne solution as well as the Blue Origin solution than I was last year, because of the progress that we've made working with industry and the progress that I've seen from those 2 companies.
And my point in raising that is that this is not an infinite amount of time we're talking about that we've got to wrestle with this RD-180 issue, that we can see the light at the end of the tunnel if we just remain steadfast and find a way to make this, navigate these waters and then get off of it permanently. Mr. Calvelli, you heard General Hyten's observations about the Delta Falcon mix. Do you agree with those? And can you tell us what impact that would have on NRO operations?
Yes, I agree with what General Hyten answered, and as well as the implications to us are the same that the Air Force has. And I think one of the big things here would be the timing. So, for example, I've got unique vehicles that were designed around flying on an Atlas. If I was told, like, tomorrow they could not go on an Atlas, I mean, the cost would be higher. If it's a gradual transition over a period of years, the cost would be lower. And so it all depends on the time frame of the decision is made.
But you would agree, I'm asking, I don't want to be leading questions.
Okay.
Not in the courtroom. But would you agree that the time frame after you get past 3 to 5 years is just hard to predict? I mean, there's no way to know that you're going to have, what kind of launch capable opportunities are going to be out there or demands?
Sure, that's correct, sir.
Okay. All right. The underpinning of the Air Force RD-180 replacement plan is based on creating 2 commercially viable launch systems which all meet the ELV requirements. Let me give you 2 examples of what I've heard about the commercial market from experts on this point that we were just talking about. General Mitchell's study on the RD-180 reliance mitigation stated, quote, "Launch capability exceeds demand 3 to 1 to service this fixed market," close quote. And you can see the monitors for a slide on this commercial launch environment according to General Mitchell's report. Separately, Ms. Katrina McFarland, who leads acquisition in OSD ATL, stated in one of our launch hearings last year that, quote, "The 2014 commercial space transportation forecast that came out as has a flat line on what we can anticipate in the future that would bring in terms of commercial NGO to the government. They're all competing for the same size pie," close quote. General Hyten and Mr. Weatherington, do you disagree with General Mitchell and Ms. McFarland's assessment of the commercial launch market? General Hyten first.
So if you look at that chart, the one that should be clear to everybody is that we've never predicted the commercial launch market correctly. I don't think we fully understand what the commercial launch market is going to be, and I wouldn't bet exactly where the commercial launch market is going to end up in 3 to 5 years again. What I would say is the commercial launch market is more mature, and the one thing that if you look at those numbers on there, there are still significant numbers available for the commercial launch industry. Our launch industry, unfortunately, has not been able to ever compete for those because we've been way too high priced. If you look at how many ELVs, how many of the rockets, Atlas and Delta, that we've launched since the beginning, 92. Of those 92, 62 were for the Department of Defense and the national security missions. 16 were for NASA, and 14 were for the commercial sector. Only 14.
That's amazing. 14
in the entire history of the program. So whatever we do, we need to be more competitive and more commercially viable as we get to the out years. But that's why it's a public-private partnership, because the commercial sector is not there right now. We believe that eventually there will be a commercial industry in space, but even with the commercial industry we have right now, we need to be more competitive in our
what do you
launches.
base that on when you say you believe there'll be more of a commercial demand?
Because I watched the maturation, especially in the satellite communication business, of how the satellite communication business has flourished in recent years. When we started these programs back in the mid-90s, there was really no commercial business. There is a commercial business now. A lot of that commercial business goes overseas to launch. There is also a new business taking place, mostly out of Silicon Valley, that many people call new space, that is looking at distributed constellations of numbers of small satellites. One of those companies is going to figure that out because there's a huge business case for them to figure it out. When that happens, I can't tell you. I'm not a business person, but I can tell you that it's much different than it was in the 90s when we started down this path.
All right, Mr. Weatherington, you heard me try to recite Mr. McFarland and General Mitchell's observations. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To leverage on what General Hyten said, from AT&L's perspective, the launch market really has three components. It's got the NSS component, it's got the other U.S. government component, largely NASA, and it's got the commercial component. And as General Hyten indicated, all three of these components are difficult to predict in the future. Let me just give you one example. So for national security space, our manifest is flat to trending slightly downward through the FIDEP. Later on, you'll probably ask us some questions on resiliency, and General Hyten and his staff are working hard to develop strategies that address our lack of resiliency today. One of those potential solutions is to disaggregate some constellations that likely would result in an increase in NSS launch capacity, but we aren't there yet. So it's difficult to predict what the NSS launch manifest will be in the future. Other government contractors, NASA, we've got the question of where the International Space Station is going to go in the future, so that is an unknown. And as General Hyten said, there's really two components for commercial. There's the base of commercial SATCOM, supporting a wide variety of users, and then this new space market that may be emerging. Now, you know, we bought this before about 10 years ago where we anticipated a significant increase in commercial space, and that did not materialize. So I think the point here is we have to plan for various contingencies. From AT&L's perspective, we think the best solution moving forward is a plan that gives us 2 certified launch providers that support the entire NSS manifest, and some fraction of their capability could be used for the commercial or other government market. If that does not transpire, we still need 2 certified launch providers to provide the U.S. government assured access to space.
Thank you. Chair, now yield to the ranking member from Tennessee, Mr. Cooper.
I thank the chairman. I would also like to welcome the witnesses. It's a very distinguished panel. I will be saving most of my questions for the classified session later, but I would first like to associate myself with General Hyten's answer to the chairman regarding the RD 180. I thought that was very well expressed. It worries me greatly, the GPS OCX ground system delays and cost overruns. And I noted that Lieutenant General Sam Greaves said that, quote, "It's the #1 troubled program within the Department of Defense," end of quote. Sadly, there's a lot of competition for that title, but to be the winner is not something to be proud of. So if any of you would like to comment on that situation, I would love to hear your answer.
Thank you, sir. I'll start. I've been on the record expressing my displeasure of the OCX program. I called it a disaster in the press, and I think any program that's $1 billion over budget and 5 years late meets the definition of a disaster. But the question we have to ask ourselves is what is the best way forward? What is the best way out of this? And Mr. Kendall and AT&L, and I'll let Mr. Weatherington talk about the details, had a session in December and a session just last week with the contractor, going through the details, looking at the various options. And as we sit here today, the best answer is for Raytheon, the contractor involved, to deliver that capability in a time-certain manner and give us the capability that we need to make sure that GPS is available for future years in a cyber-secure environment. And I'll let Mr. Weatherington answer the acquisition details.
Sir, again, to leverage on Mr. Hyten, or General Hyten's comments, Secretary Kendall signed out ADM on 22 December that provided an additional 24 months of schedule for the program. It also set a requirement for quarterly deep dives. As General Hyten indicated, that first deep dive took place last week out of Aurora, Colorado. That was attended by Mr. Kendall and the Secretary of the Air Force, so I think that indicates this problem has significant senior leadership attention in the department. Currently, we believe there is reasonable expectation that Raytheon can deliver the capability that we need. But Mr. Kendall also directed the Air Force to develop off-ramps for the program in the situation that we can't close on this program. I think it's also important to point out that while the program is troubled, the capability that OCX delivers is absolutely critical to the warfighter. We've got to improve our resiliency both in space and in ground, and that was one of the significant goals that OCX had. So whatever we do for the program specifically, we have to deliver that capability to the warfighter.
Thank you. I have no more questions, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the ranking member. Chair now recognizes the vice chairman of the committee, Mr. Lamborn of Colorado, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this will be both for General Hyten and General Buck. But there's a difference between JICSPOC and JSPOC. Can you explain why each one is where it's at and what are the plans going forward, especially for JICSPOC, which is the newer of those two organizations?
Yes, sir. For the record, the Joint Space Operations Center is at Vandenberg Air Force Base, California. It is the day-to-day operations center that is commanded by General Dave Buck, the commander of the Joint Force Component under Strategic Command, to lead the day-to-day operations. And they have two fundamental missions that drive their focus. Number one, they have to be organized, trained, and equipped to provide space support to theater warfighters around the world. And that is what they do tremendously well every day. And the second piece is they have to provide us situational awareness of everything that's going on in space. They end up providing that situational awareness for us and for users around the world, including international partners as well as commercial partners. What we realized is that if conflict does, God forbid, extend into space someday, we need to have the capability to focus on planning for that conflict. And so we decided we'd create an experimental organization at Schriever Air Force Base in Colorado to look at experimentation of that conflict should it one day occur. We started that on the 1st of October and we continue to do that. The reason that Schriever Air Force Base was chosen was really for a very simple reason, is that Schriever Air Force Base has unique connectivity. We can talk about that connectivity in detail in the classified session, but basically the bottom line is it's connected to every national security ground station in the world from Schriever Air Force Base. That connectivity is essentially important so that you can respond real time to concerns and contingencies that may arise in threat in space someday. So that's the basic reason why the JICSPOC, the Joint Interagency Combined Space Operations Center, was put at Schriever Air Force Base.
Okay, yeah, General, if you.
Yeah, General Hyten, thank you, sir. I have nothing more to add. I think it was very succinct answer and spot on.
All right, great. And then what's next for JICSPOC after the fourth and last experimental period in May?
So after the fourth experimental period in the JICSPOC, well, actually, we're going through that process right now. We've learned a great deal from the first three periods. We're continuing to look. We have proposals up to the senior leadership in the department now about how we transition to a future construct. You'll see in our 17 President's budget that we've requested money, a small amount of money for the JICSPOC, as well as continuing funding for the JSPOC and the JSPOC mission system. We believe that both of those will have a significant role in the future, but that role will be determined by the senior leadership of the department as we come to the end. But those recommendations are coming forward now.
Well, I'm just real excited about the potential for Department of Defense and the intelligence community working together in an organized, formal way for the first time ever when it comes to space.
Well, thank you, Congressman, for that statement, because to me that is the number one lesson learned from the JICSPOC right now, is that the critical partnership we have with the NRO and the intelligence community, it's better than I've ever seen it in my 35-year career. It's remarkable the progress that we're making, and that partnership is critical to the future.
Would anyone from the intelligence community like to add anything?
Yeah, so as you know, I couldn't echo better the words General Hyten said, but as you know, I mean, there are adversaries out there that are trying to deny U.S. Our capabilities that we have in space and the decisive advantage that space gives us. The JICSPOC is an amazing effort between the IC and the DoD to share information, whether that's indications and warning, or whether it's on defensive kinds of maneuvers that we potentially could do, through a whole unity of effort between the two organizations. And to me, from an IC perspective, the more information we have between ourselves to share information to protect our systems, the better off we'll be. So it's a great opportunity, and it's a great teamwork between the IC and DoD.
I would just quickly echo those comments on both ends. It's a synergy we haven't seen before. NGA is fully participating in all of these experiments so that we can best serve the nation.
Thank you. And one last question, General Hyten. You're asking for $20 million for a ground enterprise to take 17 different interfaces for ground control systems and make one system, so training is much more consistent throughout the Air Force. Do you want to respond to that?
So it's taking 17 different ground systems that we have right now and not creating a single ground system, but creating a single interface and a single common structure, because today we have to train our airmen to operate 17 different systems. That's inefficient, it's expensive, and it's also hard on our airmen. So we would like to have a common interface, a common structure that everything plugs into, so that the ground systems of the future will all be built to plug into that same common interface. As we walk into that, that's what we're really talking about, the enterprise ground. That's why it's a fairly small amount of money, because it's really engineering work, system engineering analysis that has to be done to define where we're going to go in the future, because the money for the ground systems is actually in all these big programs, SBIRS, AEHF, GPS. They all have significant funding for the ground. The question is, how do we actually build that ground structure in the future so it is a common structure for our airmen to operate on?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a brief question, if I might. I was out of Stratcom last week and met with General Wilson, and he gave a great brief on all the issues they're dealing with. Could someone answer? One of the areas we talked about, of course, and we talk about a lot in here, is cyber and being able to stand up the force necessary by 2018 to address those issues. Could someone just give a comment on, General, on where that is, General Hyten?
So I actually think I'm the only one on the panel that can. So I apologize to my panel members, but I have cyber underneath my command as well. And so part of our job in the Air Force is to man our section of the cyber mission force. 39 teams that we have to field. We're in the process of building those out right now. The cyber mission force is a key element. It consists of national mission teams to protect the nation, combat mission teams to support the combatant commanders, and cyber protection teams to defend our own capabilities. We're making progress. We're a little behind in the Air Force and stepping up to that. We have a training pipeline that is limited in how many people we can put through that. I know that the Commander of Strategic Command and the Commander of Cyber Command have both complained to my leadership about us going faster. We're doing everything we can to put extra capabilities and figure out smarter ways to train our cyber professionals to get there.
Thanks, General. Can I just one follow-up? Do you see a benefit? We had some discussions about to ramp up the training, to provide additional training sites, additional training opportunities. Is that something you're thinking about doing?
It is. In fact, the Air National Guard is standing up a new unit in Arkansas.
Right.
And one of the things we're looking at is how to better leverage the Guard as a total force to provide us additional training opportunities.
I think Nebraska is one of those National Guard teams as well.
So, the Guard is a perfect partner in cyber, more than maybe any other mission, because it just can be done from anywhere. It requires unique training. It doesn't require 24/7 because you can come in and come out. It's a perfect total force mission, and we're looking at new ways to leverage the Guard and the Reserve to do that.
Thanks, General. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Chair, I recognize Chairman Forbes for 5 minutes for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for being here today. Earlier this month in a House Appropriations hearing with Secretary James and General Welch, they were asked a question about eliminating single-point failures in space launch by continuing development of secondary launch sites at Wallops Island, Virginia, and Kodiak, Alaska, which would help support small and medium-class launches for DoD, civil and commercial users. In response, General Welch stated that, quote, as we look at the space enterprise and how we do it differently in the future, as we look at more disaggregation, microsats, CubeSats, small sats, things that don't have to go from a large launch complex, I think proliferating launch complexes is going to be a natural outshoot of this. He added, this is the kind of thing General Hyten is talking about. How do we change the game for the long term? General Hyten, as you know, Wallops and Kodiak represent the only other launch sites in the United States capable of launching to orbit outside of the Cape and Vandenberg. Could you please elaborate on General Welch's comments about opportunities to make greater use of these spaceports to support DoD missions?
So the most important element in General Welch's statement was the existence of smaller satellites and different satellite architectures in the future. We believe, and we have built something we call the Space Enterprise Vision, a joint vision with the National Reconnaissance Office, where we look at different ways of doing business in the future. And smaller satellites, not necessarily small, but smaller satellites are a key piece of that puzzle. One of the reasons that we only operate out of the Cape and Vandenberg today, Cape Canaveral in Florida and Vandenberg in California, is because the satellite processing facilities that are required in order to move those satellites onto the rockets only exist at the Cape and Vandenberg. We could not do that out of Kodiak or Wallops today. But as we move into a different structure where we have smaller satellites and small satellites and maybe CubeSats as well someday to do certain missions, we will need to take advantage of it. That also builds resiliency into our launch infrastructure. We have vulnerabilities when everybody knows that the only place that we launch rockets from are at Cape Canaveral and Vandenberg. It's better to have more places to launch from. I'll be going up to Alaska in 2 months to visit Kodiak. I look forward to that. I've seen Wallops in the past. I did Wallops missions way back when I was a captain. There's advantages of going there, but again, the satellites have to be ready. It's satellites that drive the launch business, not the rockets. If the satellites are there, then the launch industry will respond to it.
Good. Thank you. Mr. Loverro, how are DoD space procurement policies taking into account the opportunities that newer orbital launch facilities like Wallops and Kodiak provide, and how can Congress support efforts to make sure these launch complexes are available to support small and medium class defense launch needs?
Sir, I think most of the policies that the administration has put forward definitely support both commercial and state-sponsored launch capabilities. So you have seen a proliferation. We've talked about Kodiak and Wallops today, but there are no less than 6 different states that have filed for Space Launch Ports Authority. I think this is a great example of the competitive nature of space launch, and I think that this is a place that we should allow allow that industry to flourish by, again, encouraging the commercial world and the states to go ahead and make those investments. I will tell you, I agree with everything that General Hyten says, but I would also hearken back to the question of what is the launch industry going to look like in the future that we answered when we talked about launch vehicles. If we don't have a large commercial space industry, if we only have the government space launch capability, we also can't maintain economically more than a couple of launch sites. So, because launch sites are not free. They are just not pads that sit there by themselves. They have to be maintained. So there has to be enough throughput, and that goes back to what General Hyten says. If you need the satellites drive the launch infrastructure doesn't drive the satellites.
Good. Gentlemen, thank you. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your testimony, and wish we had several hours to go through it. General Hyten, is the Air Force and the military dependent upon GPS for virtually everything?
I think the world is dependent on GPS. The military certainly is. We have built an amazing capability that fundamentally changed warfare. All precision warfare today is based on GPS. We still have laser-guided munitions that we drop in certain areas, but most of the munitions we drop are GPS-guided. Most of our operations are GPS-fed. The timing signal that comes off GPS in some ways is more important than the navigation signal. So we're unbelievably...
Like my ATM won't work without the timing.
Your ATM won't work. You can get gas, stoplights stop working.
Do all you gentlemen agree with that? It's like, it's been said that GPS is the single point of failure. Is that correct? For virtually everything that you've talked about here?
It could be looked at as a single point of failure, but one of the things that we do is we build resiliency into our weapon systems. We have a backup inertial navigation system that we use in most of our weapon systems to allow us to do that. Nonetheless, GPS is a vulnerability. So we're looking at a number of different ways. We can talk about that in the closed hearing in more detail, but a number of different ways to ensure that we can continue to operate in a GPS-denied environment.
Have you considered terrestrial-based timing?
There are a number of terrestrial-based timing sources that are out there. ELORAN is one of the ones that we're looking at across the coast. That's not a DoD system, but the Department of Transportation and the Coast Guard in particular are looking at that. That has significant benefits around our ports to reduce vulnerability of GPS. But in order for ELORAN to work, there has to be ELORAN receivers that can take the signals off of ELORAN, because if you build ELORAN and there's no receivers, it would be like building GPS without the GPS receiver.
Are receivers possible to be built?
Yes, they are. But again, somebody has to invest in that money. The GPS market blossomed because there was a huge commercial market. The question you have to ask yourself for ELORAN, and that's for somebody that's not on this panel, that's a Department of Transportation question, but what is the marketplace that will come for ELORAN? It's probably shipping, those kind of pieces.
Let's see, the Department of Defense is for defense?
Department of Defense is for defense, absolutely. And that's why we're
If somebody wanted to knock out our electrical systems or our communication systems or our financial systems, they would knock out the GPS, wouldn't they?
And they
Is
would.
that a defense issue?
That is a defense issue. That's why we look at that. That's why we're part of the National Position
Mr.
Navigation and
Loverro,
Timing XCOM.
Why did you write me a letter saying that there's no role for the Department of Defense for the ELORAN system? Why is the Department of Defense not willing to spend like, I don't know, $50 million a year to provide the foundational backup system to GPS? Why did you write that letter to me?
I'm sorry, sir, was that to me? I didn't hear who it was addressed to
Oh,
me.
your name was on it.
Yeah, okay,
So-
no, I just didn't hear if you said that was to me or not. So, sir, so there was not, so we do not have a Department of Defense requirement for GPS. You do know, and I.
Well, we just established the fact that GPS that the absence of GPS is a defense issue.
Yes, sir. There are many issues that go ahead and transition from defense issues to national security issues. I would go ahead and state.
The Department of Defense is not a national security issue?
No,
Is that
sir.
what you're saying to me?
I absolutely agree it is. As you know, I have told you that I wanted to look in this question more. I've done that. I still owe you a written paper on this. I understand. My sense is that ELORAN is one of several capabilities that could help this issue. But I think
And the
point
other
that-
ones are?
the other ones are better GPS or GNSS user equipment, local time sources, and in fact, in many cases, it's a combination of all three.
Are they available?
Yes, sir, they are. Because in fact, the DoD is in our own timing infrastructure. Those are the kind of backups that we're putting into our infrastructure. The point that General Hyten, though, made is very important, and I think it's instructive. Many of you may not know that when we created the newest version of GPS, we created a second civil signal called L2 based upon the President's direction back in 1996, because many people believed the commercial world would adopt it. There are no L2 receivers available in the world today because nobody feels it necessary to listen to the second civil signal. So I think the concern isn't so much what is the source of timing, which ELORAN would be a good and appropriate source for the continent of the United States. I think the question is, how do we make sure people adopt the receiver infrastructure to go ahead and meet that source?
No time left, but let me just pose this question. You can send it to me in writing along with the other information you've promised.
Yes, sir, I absolutely will.
Have other countries and other parts of the world established a ground-based terrestrial timing system?
Sir, as a matter of fact, they did, and they've shut them down. Because
All of them?
Yes, France, Norway,
Russia and China?
Russia has a different system. I don't know about Russia's status, but France, Norway, and UK have shut theirs down because of a lack of users. So the same problem that we
It's a longer
talk about.
question.
Yes, sir.
I will get into it with you again.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Chair will point out now we've been called for votes. We're going to recognize Mr. Bridenstine from Oklahoma for 5 minutes. Then we will recess and come back after this series of votes, which will be about 1 hour from right now. Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Hyten, the Air Force has requested funding for a wideband SATCOM AOA. I think that's perfectly appropriate. And then we received information and news reports about the Air Force purchasing additional legacy satellites, WGS satellites. How do we make sure that we as a country are taking advantage of the technological advances happening in the commercial sector? Of course, the AOA is what I thought what that was for, and now it doesn't necessarily appear that that's going to be the case. Can you share with us how you plan to make sure that we're taking advantage of the commercial advancements?
Yes, Congressman, thank you for the question. The real issue there is that the AOA is going to answer those questions. We have not made a commitment yet to build any more WGS satellites, not one, not two, not three. We haven't made any commitment along those lines. We won't make any commitments about what we're going to build next until we've done the analysis of alternatives. The analysis of alternatives is being structured through the staff right now. One of my panel members may be able to comment on those, especially those that work in the Pentagon. But it's critical that that AOA look at it across the board, and we're going to be demanding customers of the AOA to make sure that the commercial sector is properly looked at across the board, not just from a provision of capability standpoint, but from an opportunity to provide different capabilities that we may not think about. So that AOA is critical to defining the future. We're putting those, we want to make sure that that's done in a very time-certain environment. We hope to get it done by March of 17 so we can meet the congressional direction there. That's going to be a fast time to do an AOA, but the faster we do AOAs, the better they are, because AOAs that take a long time tend to be somewhat irrelevant by the time they're reported out.
Got it. And Secretary Loverro, we've heard cost estimates from commercial operators and, of course, from the Department of Defense on WGS, and it doesn't seem to add up that we're getting apples-to-apples comparisons. Can you help us make sure that we're going to get apples-to-apples comparisons on the cost of commercial vice military-owned and operated satellites?
Absolutely. We have got to go ahead and do an apples-to-apples comparison. We've got to go ahead and include all the costs that are relevant to things like WGS. That is not always easy to do because some of those costs are at third and fourth level, but we have to go ahead and do that because otherwise we'll get a skewed result from the analysis.
Okay. And Secretary Loverro, in January, in an interview with Space News, you suggested that a civil agency should perform certain day-to-day, non-military space situational awareness activities for commercial and foreign operators. Specifically, you stated that, quote, the JSPOC's primary role should be to support U.S. and allied military space operations, unquote. Do you support building the capability of a civilian agency to obtain space situational awareness data and perform limited SSA activities for commercial and foreign operators?
Congressman, I do. So this is obviously a very important question. The DoD is not going to go ahead and give up our ability to go ahead and do SSA for our warfighting mission. At the same time, we recognize that to fully support our commercial industries, we need to go ahead and put that on a more civil footing, one that not only can go ahead and do space traffic monitoring, which is what we do from the JSPOC today, but some level of space traffic management. The Congress recognized this in their legislation last year, and I think we recognize it as well. So I know with my colleagues up here, we're all trying to figure out what the right balance is between that. How do we do that? I think we all believe this has got to start off with a crawl, a walk, and a run, which we would believe would begin with putting probably FAA personnel out of the JSPOC to help that function. But we recognize that the future is going to require that a civil agency take over this far larger and growing sector than we should support from the DoD.
Thank you. And General Hyten, as the commander of Air Force Space Command, is performing space traffic management for the entire world in your mission statement?
No, sir, it's not.
If a civil agency were to perform some space traffic management activities for non-DoD customers, would that make it easier or harder for airmen at the JSPOC to focus on deterring fighting and winning wars in space?
That would make it easier, but I do have one comment about that, is that it's not in our mission to do those things, but what you have to realize is that we have to do those things in order for us to operate safely. So it is critical that we continue to perform the space situational awareness mission, and critical that we have the ability to integrate that into all of our other operations. But nonetheless, the ability to do space traffic management like Mr. Loverro described, it's not in our mission statement. We do it because we have to do it. Somebody has to do it for the world, but it is more a civil function than it is a military function.
Fantastic. I've got just a few seconds left, and so we'll just take this for the record. Space and Missile Systems Center released an RFI seeking input from industry on commercial weather data and services to meet DoD requirements. And basically, it's a policy to buy data from the commercial sector to feed our numerical weather models and predict weather. Could DoD benefit from following NOAA's pilot program approach to begin the process of establishing standards, testing integration, and eventually buying data and services for weather purposes?
We'll take it for the record, sir, but the answer is yes, we're going to use all data capabilities that we can, but we'll take that and give you a detailed answer for the record.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Chair now calls that we will be in recess until about 4:40 when we return to this room. Chair calls the meeting back to order and recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Dr. Fleming, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Hyten and Mr. Weatherington, what is the Air Force's plan for ensuring optimal U.S. investment to replace the Russian RD-180 engine?
So I can talk about the top level, and I'll let Mr. Weatherington talk about the acquisition strategy. But our basic overall plan is to develop public-private partnerships with industry to leverage the capability that we need to ensure that all the capabilities we need for future the future launch enterprise exist when we need them, that's just as soon as possible to get off the RD-180. So that includes first stage engines, it includes upper stage engines, it includes solid adjunct boosters as well as a solid main core. So we're looking at the entire enterprise to make sure that the enterprise will be ready when we get there.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Congressman, I think it's also important to point out that for the U.S. Department of Defense, we do not procure actual launch systems. We procure that service. So the plan for the department moving ahead is to incentivize industry to partner with us to develop launch capability that will meet the full manifest requirements that DoD has. Now, as General Hyten has indicated, there are several different technologies that we need to invest in to get there. We need both main stage engines and we need upper stage engines. But fundamentally, we need integrated solution that will launch our satellites. Again, as General Hyten said, it's about the satellite and the rocket will follow. So the strategy the department has is to incentivize team in public-private partnerships with various commercial entities, either rocket integrators or in some cases specific subsystems. And the Air Force has done a great job of structuring the other transaction authority activities currently underway to go out and invest in those critical technologies we need with the plan that every one of those has a path to get to a rocket integrator and deliver us an integrated solution likely in the 19, 20, 21 timeframe.
Are the specifications superior to the Russian RD-180 engine? In other words, will we end up with a better product if this flows properly?
Well, again, sir, because we're not actually buying a rocket or even buying an engine, what DoD requires is a requirement to launch our full manifest. So today, as I think you're aware, we have 2 systems certified to do that today, Atlas and Delta, several variations of each of those systems, but they cover the entire manifest. Delta IV Heavy, which we use for our largest systems, is a fairly expensive system. Our goal in the development of these future launch systems is to bring that cost down, especially at the high end.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and how do we maintain assured access and protect the taxpayers as we transition off that engine, the RD-180?
So that's why our recommendation, sir, is to allow us to buy enough RD-180s to cover us through the transition period, because that'll be significantly less cost to the taxpayer. As we talked about earlier, we don't know for sure what the cost will be if we go a different direction, for example, a Delta Falcon mix. If we go a different direction, I believe that the cost will be measured in the billions. The Secretary stated that the estimates are from 1.5 to 5 billion. That's true, but that spread in the estimates are all based on the assumptions. So if you make certain assumptions about where the industry is going to be, you can drive that answer to wherever you want. But I'm confident that it'll be a significant bill to the taxpayer if we need to do something in the transition period. But again, to emphasize the point, we want off the Russian engine as fast as we can get, and that's why we put the program in place that we have.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. I believe the gentleman from Colorado is next up for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Hyten and Lieutenant General Buck, can you discuss how funding for the 460th Space Wing and 233rd Space Group are prioritized within Air Force Space Command and JFCC space. Is it a top priority? Do you have any concerns that funding priorities will negatively impact our missile warning mission?
So I guess the easy answer to that question, then I'll let General Buck weigh in, but the easy answer is that missile warning is a survival mission for the nation. So strategic missile warning has been and will continue to be the highest priority mission that we have in Space Command. That's the mission of the 460th Wing, part of the mission of the 233rd. So as we look at those capabilities in the future, that'll continue to be a high priority.
Great. And the good news there, sir, is that we're putting some money into the infrastructure up there. As you know, we just replaced the ups up there because we had power issues, as you're tracking, I'm sure. Not only in the survivable mission control center, but also in the primary mission control center. So we've got our eye on the ball there, and we're very aware of how critical that mission is to the warfighter.
General Hyten, can you discuss the level at which the Air Force makes cost, schedule, and performance trade space decisions related to missile warning? Are there any instances where the Air Force and STRATCOM would have to sacrifice national missile warning responsiveness in order to reduce cost?
So we'll never trade off the strategic missile warning mission because that's a survival of the nation issue. So that can't be traded off. There is a discussion worth having about how much of the secondary missions you get from overhead persistence and IR. In other words, how much battle space awareness, how much technical intelligence, how much capability that you want to build. There's also an issue about how do you want to provide that capability. But the fundamental strategic missile warning capability that we have to have as a nation cannot be traded off, and the commander of STRATCOM has told me that in person, and those capabilities will not be traded. That is a survival of the nation issue.
Okay. Mr. Cardillo, last year you released your commercial GeoInt strategy, which outlines how you intend to leverage commercial space imagery, services, and analysis. Can you tell us what progress you are making so far this year, and can you tell us how your FY 2017 budget request further enables your successful implementation of this strategy?
We're in the learning and investigation phase of that overall strategy. We're doing it with our mission partner at the NRO because whatever we end up deciding to do from that commercial market as it matures and becomes viable, we're going to have to share the how we store that data, how we move it around, how we intermingle it with our classified systems, and we can talk more about that in closed session. I've been very pleased with the reaction that we've gotten from industry to date, but again, and so we're making small purchases to understand data types and sensor types and what kind of imagery sources they are collecting. As we learn more, but I must say too, as they become more commercially viable to create that market, we do intend in FY17, pending the Congress's budgeting, is to expand our ability to exploit that space.
Okay. Mr. Calvelli, in your written statement, you mentioned that NRO is improving space-based persistence, creating a quote-unquote thinking system called Sentient, and developing a transformative future ground architecture. Can you discuss how Buckley Air Force Base and the Aerospace Data Facility, ADFC, fit in these efforts?
Sure. All of our ADFs are a major piece of how we operate our systems today, and will continue to be for the future. What we're trying to do is to try to tie our systems together more closely. So instead of stovepipes of GeoInt or stovepipes of SIGINT, it's sort of an integrated set of sensors in space and integrated ground providing data to our user community. The ADFC, ADF East, ADF Southwest will all play major roles in that in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I think the gentleman, I believe the gentleman from Oklahoma has one cleanup question. Is that what I was told?
I've got a couple if you
Knock yourself out.
I wanted to ask General Hyten, Air Force budget documents state that you will conduct an end-to-end over-the-air demonstration of protected tactical waveform in mid-2019. The Air Force apparently delayed the initial launch capability of protected tactical service by 3 years until 2027. What factors account for the delay to PTS, and why is there an 8-year gap between full-up PTW demo and ILC?
So the answer to the question, Congressman, is that we have yet to complete the Protected Satcom Communication System, AOA, the analysis of alternatives. Before we can start a program within the department, we need to complete the AOA. That AOA is imminent. We've completed it. Mr. Kendall, the Undersecretary for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, has signed off on it, pushed that into CAPE. CAPE is now doing the sufficiency study. They've committed to completing that by April 15th. But as we submitted our budget documents, we had to make some assumptions of what we thought the future was going to be. And to us, it looked clear that protected tactical waveforms will be part of the architecture in the future. Therefore, it was important for us to pursue the Pathfinder that you saw in the budget documents. And then the rest is to be determined. So we don't want to put a program in place without the proper analysis having been completed, and that'll be complete here very shortly. And we'll share that with the Congress when it's complete.
Okay. Last question. I've been told that prior to this RD-180 issue, a new low-cost upper stage engine replacement had been a high priority for your national space security launch needs. If this is true, how do you plan to address the upper stage replacement, and is there a way to couple the development of this upper stage engine, such as those already funded and developed through the Small Business Innovation Research Program, in a manner that benefits replacement of the RD-180?
So in the contracts we just let with industry, in those contracts, in those other transactional authority contracts, there are two pieces of it that look at upper stages. One is with SpaceX for their Raptor upper stage, and one is with the ULA for their ACES upper stage. Both of those are required in their business plan in the future to allow them to access all the orbital requirements that we have to launch our entire manifest. So, as you stated, the upper stage is extremely important. We've recognized that for a long time, long ahead of the RD-180 issue. It's a challenge, though, to get the capabilities that we need out of those upper stages. But if we do it correctly, we'll be able to move into a different architecture for the future that'll be much more efficient, because the upper stage will be more efficient in achieving multiple orbits.
And last question, if the chairman will allow me, and this is for you as well, General Hyten. How does EGS relate to the requested Protected Tactical Enterprise Service?
EGS being the Enterprise Ground System?
Yes, Enterprise Ground Service.
So the Enterprise Ground capability, as we look at the Protected Tactical Waveform, what we're trying to get to with Enterprise Ground is we're trying to structure the process so that we can operate our satellites, perform telemetry, tracking, and controlling off of a common infrastructure in our ground system, so we can have our operators focus on providing the warfighting effect to the world, to our entire force structure across the board as we look at that. So it's important that we move into an enterprise ground structure, because that will free up our airmen to effectively operate the Protected Tactical Waveform in a threatened environment as we go through. It's not that we can't do it on the legacy. We will be able to do it on the legacy, but in order for us to fully use our airmen capabilities, we need to structure the program so that we're focused on the effect that we're creating on the battlefields of the future, not on just flying the satellite.
Got it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman from Colorado has one cleanup question.
Thank you. Mr. Calvelli and Mr. Cardillo and General Hyten, are NRO, NGA, and Air Force Space Command getting what you need from Buckley Air Force Base in the city of Aurora? Is there anything else Congress can do to support your efforts at ADFC?
I'll start and say I think we're in great shape out at ADFC, and appreciate all the support out there from Aurora and the whole town.
Mr. Calvelli is my landlord. I'm a happy tenant. We're very pleased with the support we get from Buckley.
And 460th is everybody's landlord. And you know, the whole issue recently about encroachment was a big concern of ours. That was just addressed this last week when we looked at the adjacent land and how we're going to deal with that in the future. That was the one big issue that was hanging out there for Buckley, because in many of our bases in the past, we've had encroachment issues that have really impacted our mission. I think the actions of the last week with the land around Buckley have have really gone a long way to solving that problem for a very, very long term, perhaps forever, and that's where we need to be. So thank you, Congressman, for that help there.
I thank the gentleman. General Hyten, can you tell us about the status of DMSP 19?
DMSP 19 is about dead. That's about as blunt as I could put it. A few weeks ago, we lost the ability to command the satellite. The way DMSP satellites operate is they still broadcast tactical information, but we can't get the recorded information down to our users because we can't task the satellite, we can't command it anymore. When we can't command it anymore, that also means we can't take care of this satellite's health, keep it pointed in the right direction, keep it safe. So in the very near future, if we can't command it again, we'll lose the satellite forever.
So should we launch DMSP 20?
In a perfect world, Congressman, I would prefer to launch DMSP 20. But we received direction from the Congress last year to terminate that program. General Greaves in Los Angeles issued the order to terminate on the 30th of December 2015. We're in that process. We'll reach the point of no return in June of this year, that after that point the satellite will be torn apart and not able to put back together. I said last year in testimony that it was a difficult decision to recommend whether we wanted Flight 20 or not, but we ended up recommending to the Congress that we launch Flight 20. I wish I'd have been stronger in that, because the statement I made is that we need it if we have a failure, and it appears now we've had a failure.
Well, if it's important to get that capability up there, why isn't the Air Force working on a follow-on program to meet that capability?
So we're working on a follow-on program. It's called the Weather Satellite Follow-on Capability to meet the three elements of the needs. We also have a new tasker from the Joint Requirements Oversight Council, the JROC. General Selva sent us a tasker this last week to look at the first two gaps, which are cloud characterization and theater support. Report back to him by the 1st of May whether the capabilities we have right now, given all the changes, will be able to support the requirements that we need. In that memo, he also supported the launch of DMSP Flight 20.
Great. General Hyten, I'm concerned about the loss of or transfer of spectrum and the impact on national security, particularly when I hear the chairman of the FCC telling the satellite industry that, quote, it's more practical to get on the train than be run over by it, close quote. You may recall that your predecessor, General Shelton, testified from pretty much where you're seated right now and warned that a proposal under consideration by the FCC would have created extensive harmful interference to GPS. Can you please describe for me your views on the proposal by the Light Squared, or the company Light Squared, or its successor, Legato?
So I've heard the Legato has put forth a new proposal to use that spectrum, but I'll tell you, Congressman, I have seen no data that supports the use of that frequency spectrum other than the data I saw in 2011. So the position of Air Force Space Command is the same as it was when General Shelton sat in that seat. I don't think that we should infringe on the GPS spectrum. That's a critical capability, not just for the military security of the nation, but for the entire economic well-being of this nation. We can't allow that to happen. All that being said is that we have an effort with the Department of Transportation in April this year that we're going to go out and do some detailed testing on that spectrum area. We'll then have a peer review in May and June of this year, and then we'll go through a process where we'll look at it and see what elements of those spectrum, because we're trying to be good partners as we work at that, but the partnership has to be based on real testing, real impacts, and what the impacts of national security are, and we cannot do something that will infringe on our national security, period.
All right, that brings the open portion of this hearing to a conclusion. We will now recess briefly while we move upstairs to 2216 for the classified portion.